Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, August 12th, 2024. 1 week to go until the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling talks about security preparations, saying peaceful protesters are welcome, but the city will not tolerate rioters. President Joe Biden proposes a new initiative called Time is Money that aims to make it easier to cancel subscriptions and memberships, shorten wait times on the phone with customer service, and reduce excessive paperwork that companies require, what the president calls corporate tricks to take your money and cause you aggravation. We'll talk about it with Reuters White House correspondent Andrea Shalal. White House says it shares the same concerns and expectations as Israel that Iran and its proxies could launch a significant set of attacks this week against Israel. Bipartisan Senate delegation meets with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. Republican Lindsey Graham of South Carolina calls the Ukraine military's cross-border operation into the Russian territory of Kursk brilliant and bold. And the International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach talks about some countries putting pressure on the IOC for their own political ends. Democratic National Convention begins in 1 week in Chicago, and in addition to the tens of thousands of delegates, media, and visitors coming to the city, there are also expected to be protesters. WBZ-TV reports that protesters are expected to hit the streets on the first, third, and last day of the convention, August 19th, 21st, and 22nd, marking the kickoff and acceptance speeches of both Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, the vice presidential candidate, and presidential candidate Vice President Kamala Harris. The largest of the planned demonstrations, the March on the DNC, is scheduled to start at noon August 19th and 5 p.m. August 22nd, with rallies at Union Park on the near west side. Speakers from community organizations will take turns on the mic, and organizers aim to book a few noteworthy politicians and celebrities, after which those gathered will march to the vicinity of the United Center, where the DNC main events will be held. A protest against the war in Gaza is planned for the Wednesday evening of the convention, and a march for LGBTQ+ and reproductive rights scheduled on Michigan Avenue the eve of the DNC. That was from WBZ-TV. Chicago's Police Superintendent Larry Snelling was at the City Club of Chicago today.
Our plan is to make sure that we keep everyone in the city safe. That's all of our residents and our visitors. We want this to be successful. And you may have heard me say this before. I've said it a million times, and I mean every word of this. If people come here to protest and they want to exercise their First Amendment rights, we welcome that. And not only do we welcome it, we will protect them while they do it. And as long as they're cooperating with us, and there's a collaborative effort where we understand each other, and you know where to draw the line. You're not breaking the law. You're not destroying our city. You're not committing acts of violence. Then this will go off well. The moment that starts, we're going to intervene. I am not going to wait until it gets out of control and then try to bring it back in. The moment it starts, you put an end to it quickly, because a greater response now may mean that we need less of an even higher response later. So we will not allow people to come here and destroy this city. Look, every time I drive down...
We're going to make sure that that quote gets put out a little bit further after today, okay? Maybe every day.
Every time I drive down Lakeshore Drive, I look at this city. I look at the water. I look at the buildings. I look at the skyline. And sometimes I have to pinch myself, realizing and understanding that I'm in charge of, the second largest metropolitan police department in the country, in the most beautiful city I've ever seen. And there's a narrative outside about Chicago. And I've heard it when I've gone to other places. Oh, Chicago, I don't want to be shot. Look, Chicago's a beautiful city. And the key here is to make sure that we keep it that way. We continue to work to bringing down crime and to continue to lift our city up so that everybody can see how beautiful it is and we continue to grow.
Larry Snelling, Chicago's police superintendent, today at the City Club of Chicago. The Chicago office of the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR Chicago, describes itself as the nation's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization, held a press conference today in Chicago along with other Islamic and Muslim American groups to, quote, address community concerns and priorities ahead of the Democratic National Convention 2024 in Chicago. Ahmed Rahab is executive director of CARE Chicago.
In just a few days, this great city will once again be the center of this country's headlines and attention, and even the world's, as it has many times in its past, as the DNC descends on this amazing city of ours. Last October, unfortunately, we were also the center of the world's and national headlines due to the fact that this city witnessed one of the worst and most heinous acts of hate crimes in the history of the United States, when a 6-year-old Palestinian boy was stabbed 26 times to death, and his mother, who attempted to protect him, was stabbed into critical condition by their hateful landlord, who had been watching CNN and the coverage of the Israel-Gaza crisis, basically the bombing and the devastation of the Gazan people, the Palestinian people, by the state of Israel. He had gotten so radicalized as to pick up a kitchen knife and stab this family into smithereens, right here in our backyard. This legacy looms heavy as the DNC descends on this great city next week. Since then, we have seen a 64% increase in hate crimes this year over the past year around the same time. We have seen an astronomical rise in cases of doxing of Muslim students and Palestinian students who stand up for the rights, the human rights of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. We have seen many Americans, Palestinian, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, atheist, you name it, a diverse backgrounds of Americans who have been fired from their positions at hospitals, at educational facilities, at private and public enterprises, at banks, simply for speaking their mind in their personal capacity on their own social media. We've seen retaliation, retribution, people who are not hired, people who are fired just for practicing their constitutionally protected First Amendment right of free speech.
Ahmed Rahab, executive director of CARE Chicago, that's the Council on American Islamic Relations, at a news conference today in Chicago. Associated Press writes, with a solidified presidential ticket stumping across the country and a massive amount of money to spend, the Democratic Party is targeting 7 critical battleground states with paid advertising for Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. The Democratic National Committee announced the Harris-Walz advertising push on Monday, which includes more than 70 billboards across the key battleground states: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. It's the ticket's first paid advertising blitz since Walz joined the campaign, and the first of many to come in areas that are poised to determine the outcome of the presidential election in November. That was a story from AP. And from CNN, former President Donald Trump on Monday posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, for the first time in nearly a year, ahead of his conversation on the platform later in the day with ex-owner and Tesla CEO Elon Musk. Donald Trump put up several videos today, including this one.
This is the final battle. With you at my side, we will demolish the deep state. We will expel the warmongers from our government. We will drive out the globalists. We will cast out the communists, Marxists, and fascists. We will throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We will rout the fake news media, and we will liberate America from these villains once and for all.
That video posted on @RealDonaldTrump on X, formerly Twitter, first use of the account in almost a year. @Kamala Harris reposted a video from Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff's account, and it featured actor B.D. Wong in a parody of the TV show he used to act in, Law & Order.
In the American political system, a presidential candidate who has been convicted of 34 felonies is considered especially heinous. In Washington, D.C., a dedicated former prosecutor is challenging this convicted felon as part of an elite squad known as Kamala Harris for President. This is her moment, and I am on her team. Oh, hey, Doug.
Actor B.D. Wong and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff putting his head into the screen at the end. That was posted first by Doug Emhoff's account on X and then reposted by Kamala Harris. This is Washington Today. Representative Ilhan Omar, Minnesota Democrat, begins a Newsweek article. Is set to face off against former Minneapolis City Councilor Don Samuels in her primary race on Tuesday, with polls suggesting the Congresswoman has a lead over her challenger. Omar is the latest progressive Democrat to face a high-profile primary this year. So far, the Democratic Party's moderate wing has defeated 2 members of the Squad, an informal coalition of U.S. House progressives. Representatives Jamal Bowman of New York and Cori Bush of Missouri have both lost their primaries, while Representative Summer Lee of Pennsylvania defeated her challenger earlier this year. Omar, first elected in 2018, faced a competitive challenge from Samuels in 2022 when she defeated him by only 2 percentage points. That was from Newsweek. Here are some of the ads in that race.
Minnesota might be cold, but those who call this place home, you are warm and caring, hardworking, resilient, and proud. You welcomed me as a refugee. You taught me the power of organizing and democracy. You are who I fight for every day to deliver food security, affordable housing, and health care. I'm Ilhan Omar, and I approve this message because I am so proud to represent you.
It's time. The dream that millions of Americans have worked for, the dream for a better life, is increasingly out of reach. Stagnant wages, soaring housing costs, and out-of-reach health care are making it harder to get ahead. But we can't restore the promise of the American dream by placing blame for past failures or refusing to work together. We need a bold, collaborative vision for the future. That's how we rebuild the American dream. I'm Don Samuels, and I'm a proud product of that dream, and I want to make it possible once again. I was born in Jamaica to a seamstress mother and a pastor father. I saw America as a beacon of hope, and I knew that if I could get there, I could do anything. That's why I've fought to be a shoulder for the next generation to stand on. It's why when my wife and I moved to North Minneapolis, we were determined to make a difference. That's why we stayed in Minneapolis even when a bullet shattered our nursery room window in our first week of living here. We never stopped believing that change requires more than empty words. It requires action. And that's why I'm running for office, because I know how to put people and progress over politics and self-interest. I'm Don Samuels, and I'm asking you to join me in that vision in making the American dream possible again.
Democratic primary ads, Minnesota's 4th Congressional District. The election is Tuesday. A story from Axios says that Don Samuels has criticized Congresswoman Omar over her statements related to the war in Gaza and issues where she split from the majority of House Democrats, such as the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But while an American Israel Public Affairs Committee-affiliated committee poured millions into other squad races, there hasn't been a similar surge in outside money here. From Reuters, the Biden administration on Monday unveiled new rules and efforts targeting consumer annoyances ranging from hard-to-cancel subscriptions, cumbersome insurance forms, and not being able to get a live customer service agent on the phone. The Time is Money initiative is aimed at cracking down on endless hold times or deliberately complicated procedures that cost consumers, said Neera Tanden, U.S. President Joe Biden's domestic policy advisor. Coming up, we'll speak with a reporter who wrote that Reuters article. First, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on this proposal at her news conference.
Today, President Biden and Vice President Harris launched Time is Money, a new government-wide effort to crack down on all the ways that cooperations and unnecessary headaches and hassles to our lives, wasting precious time and money, from excessive paperwork and unreasonable hold times to the endless hurdles some companies make you jump through to cancel subscriptions. We've all been there and know how aggravating these unnecessary delays can be today, in the coming months, The Biden-Harris administration will take wide-ranging action to crack down on these unfair practices and save Americans time and money, including making it easier to cancel subscriptions and memberships, ensuring that consumers calling customer service can talk to a real person by pressing a single button, and allowing Americans to submit health claims online. And this is just the beginning. We are calling for Americans to share their ideas through an online portal on the White House website and to tell us directly how federal action can give them their time back. Americans are tired of being played for suckers, and President Biden and Vice President Harris will continue to use every tool available to protect Americans from corporate greed and practices that hit people in their pocketbooks.
That was White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. And joining us now to talk more about this proposal is Andrea Shalal, Reuters White House reporter. Thanks for being with us. This proposal has a catchy title, Time is Money, and it builds on some of the other ideas that the Biden administration has put forth, like cracking down on junk fees. So how are they showing more or so that the government can help the average person?
Well, thanks very much. I think the Biden administration has been trying every which way to address the core concern that has plagued the Biden administration, has plagued them and President Biden as a candidate, and will continue to raise questions for Vice President Harris as a candidate, which is the cost of living. And so there are certain things that have been done, including attacking supply chain issues that came up during COVID. But one of the big themes has been going after corporations for keeping prices high, something that they call greedflation. Junk fees contribute to people's costs. And along with this junk fee problem is that, it costs time, and time is money. To stay on the phone for 45 minutes, to cancel a magazine subscription that it took you one click on your phone to subscribe to. And it's really aggravating to people, but it also costs them money. And, Neera Tanden, President Biden's senior policy advisor, domestic policy advisor, said this is not just about aggravation. This is about real money. If people don't have the time and they have two jobs and kids to take care of, they're not going to stay on the phone to get that airline refund that they're entitled to get that health care claim filed. They're just going to swallow it and take it because it is difficult and time-consuming. So this is part of a concerted government-wide effort to tackle those things and also to get at that central core that people are really struggling to make ends meet.
This proposal comes a couple of weeks after President Biden dropped out of the re-election race, but Vice President Kamala Harris is now the Democratic presidential nominee. Talk about the timing of this.
Yeah, the timing is critical. There's less than 90 days left before the November 5th election. And inflation in the economy remain one of the weakest points that the Biden administration, President Biden initially and now candidate Harris face, is that consistently in polls, people give former President Trump better marks for handling the economy than the Biden administration. They say that's unfair. They say they've done a ton of things to help people and to improve people's lives. But everything that they can do in terms of messaging obviously will help candidate Harris as she travels the country along with her newly designated running mate, Tim Walz.
Do you know if any of the proposals would go into effect immediately or soon, or would they need new laws?
No, none of the measures that they announced today require new laws. These are mostly things that have to do with agencies and a lot of bully pulpit things, coercing and leaning on big pharmaceutical companies and healthcare insurers to let people file claims online and not to make it difficult for them by requiring them to print something out and find an envelope and stick it in the mail. And some of these things were already in train that has to do with airline refunds, and some of them have to do with rules that will require that have to be promulgated. So rules that still have to be finalized, including making it just as easy to cancel a subscription as it is to order one in the first place.
We're talking with Reuters White House correspondent Andrea Shalal. What has been the response from the Republicans and the Donald Trump presidential campaign?
I think they see a lot of this as white noise. We saw over the weekend that Vice President Harris proposed cutting taxes on tips for service workers and wait staff. And a very angry Donald Trump got on Truth Social and accused her of copying his idea. He did actually call for a similar proposal in June. I think the Trump campaign is very much in defensive mode right now. It's hard to argue with ending hour-long waits on endless phone trees. But I think they see it as very opportunistic, is kind of the message that I've heard.
And finally, this time is money series of proposals, how would they be enforced?
Well, it varies on the proposals, but agencies obviously control the pocketbooks. They place orders for companies, and if companies are not, and they can make it difficult for companies and corporations to get government work. That's a very big penalty. So there'll be some specifics that vary from proposal to proposal.
Andrea Shalal, Reuters White House reporter. You can find her stories at Reuters.com or on X at Andrea_Shalal. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And on that proposal to eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers, now endorsed by the Democratic presidential nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, and the Republican presidential nominee, former President Donald Trump, the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked today what President Biden's position is.
Over the weekend, Vice President said she followed former President Donald Trump in saying she would support a proposal that would not tax tipped wages. If similar bill made its way to the President of the United States, President Biden, would he sign that proposal? Because that's not something he would have embraced before.
Oh, absolutely. Look, this is something that the president supports. He supports eliminating taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers while also raising minimum wage and preventing the wealthy from gaining the system. And if you think about what the president has talked about the last 3.5 years, making sure that we have an economy that works for all, not leaving anybody behind, an economy that's built from the bottom up, middle out, the president has been fighting, and the vice president is fighting to do just that. Think about raising the minimum wage, which the Trump administration, they blocked. Cut taxes for workers and families after Trump gave a $2 trillion tax cut skewed to billionaires and big corporations. Defend overtime protections for millions of workers whom the Trump administration left behind. Ensure workers have the freedom to join a union which the Trump administration undermined. You hear it talk about Maganomics and what the GOP is for. Therefore, giving tax breaks from billionaires and corporations. They want price gouging. That's what they want to see. They don't want to protect American workers. They give, again, more tax to billionaires and corporations. That's what they've been talking about over and over and over, raising taxes for working people. That's not what we're about, and we're going to continue to do just that in the next 5 months.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre. An Axios article says neither Donald Trump nor Kamala Harris specified whether their proposals would eliminate just the income tax or both the income tax and payroll taxes that service workers pay on their tips. Payroll taxes fund Medicare and Social Security. The vagueness of both candidates' current proposals means it's also unclear exactly how many people this would affect. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says there are 2.19 million waiters and waitresses across the country as of 2022, but 2/3 of restaurant workers who work for tips earn so little that they don't pay federal income tax. That was from Axios. Wall Street today, the Dow down 140, Nasdaq up 35, and S&P up a fraction. From the Hill, the House Freedom Caucus adopted an official position in favor of adopting a continuing resolution to extend government funding past the end of the year, September 30th deadline, and until early 2025, with the intention of avoiding an end-of-year omnibus that could be favorable to Democrats. The move from the hardline conservative group amounts to a shot over the bow in the funding battle that will dominate Congress when it returns from August recess, and which will provide a critical test for Speaker Mike Johnson. That was from the Hill. Washington Today continues in a moment.
This summer, as we have since 1984, C-SPAN is bringing you live, uninterrupted coverage of the national political conventions on TV, online, on our apps, and on radio. We're proud of this tradition of service, setting us apart from other media. But with more people now canceling cable TV, C-SPAN's traditional funding is at risk. Hi, this is John, asking for your support. Thanks to an anonymous donor, every dollar you give will be matched up to $25,000. Double your donation to support C-SPAN's unfiltered political and public affairs programming. Visit cspan.org/donate today. Thanks. Your donation is now doubled at cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Washington Post article begins: since Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh's assassination, Israel, Washington, and the wider Middle East have nervously waited for Iran's promised retaliation. Nearly 2 weeks later, the response has yet to come as Tehran wrestles with how to calibrate its counterattack. In public, Iranian officials are continuing to warn of a tough reprisal to punish Israel, but in private meetings with the leaders of its armed proxies, according to those familiar with the conversations, Iran has called for caution, seeking to balance any show of force with the desire to avoid an all-out war in the region. That was from the Washington Post. The White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby opened his virtual audio news conference today with the latest assessment.
I believe you've probably seen statements made by our Israeli counterparts about their expectations, the fact that they believe that it's increasingly likely that there will be an attack by Iran and or its proxies, and perhaps in the coming days. I would tell you that we share those concerns, and that is why we have been continually speaking to our Israeli counterparts and other counterparts in the region. It is why Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin made a few post-posture adjustments, which I know you're all aware of in the region. And it is why President Biden spent a little bit of time this morning speaking to his counterparts from the UK, from France, from Germany, and Italy. That call took place mid-morning, largely to discuss these tensions in the Middle East, largely for all the leaders to repeat what they have said before in terms of reaffirming Israel's defense and the need to get a ceasefire in place, to get the hostages home, and to send a strong message that we don't want to see any rise in violence, any attacks by Iran or its proxies, and to make that clear.
The White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby opening up his online audio news conference. ABC News reports that Hamas leaders are asking mediators of the ceasefire negotiations with Israel to present a plan based on previous talks instead of engaging in new ones, according to a statement Sunday. Hamas also appeared to decline to discuss the new conditions proposed to the ceasefire plan by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in July, saying Israel then went on to escalate its aggression against our people and commit more massacres. That was from ABC News. John Kirby, during his news conference, asked about these developments as the ceasefire negotiations are scheduled to resume later this week.
Our next question will go to Josh with Bloomberg.
Hey there. Thank you. John, can you give us an update on how the U.S. sees the status of negotiations towards some sort of pause in hostilities in Gaza, and in particular, whether there will be these talks this week in Doha, and whether Hamas is participating in those or not? Thanks.
Hey, Josh, thanks. Meeting still scheduled for Thursday, the 15th. We fully expect that those talks are going to move forward, and they need to move forward. All negotiators should return to the table and bring this deal to a close. It's time to do that. The details are of such a nature that we think they can be hashed out. More critically, it's time for Hamas to release the hostages, which of course include American citizens, and help us all bring some relief to the people of Gaza. They say they care about the people of Gaza. They say they care about the Palestinian people. One way to prove that is to sign up to this deal, show up, close it, and let's get it done.
Do you have information as to have you been told directly that they won't show up, or is it kind of relying on public statements and reporting at this point?
We've seen the public statements that they put out there. We believe everybody needs to show up on Thursday and see if we can't wrap this thing up.
Thank you.
White House spokesperson John Kirby in an online audio news conference. A statement Saturday from the National Security Council spokesperson. We are deeply concerned about reports of civilian casualties in Gaza following a strike by the Israeli Defense Forces on a compound that included a school. We are in touch with our Israeli counterparts who have said they targeted senior Hamas officials, and we are asking for further details. We know Hamas has been using schools as locations to gather and operate out of, but we have also said repeatedly and consistently that Israel must take measures to minimize civilian harm. We mourn every Palestinian civilian lost in this conflict, including children, and far too many civilians continue to be killed and wounded. That was the statement from the National Security Council spokesperson. From AFP, the U.S. State Department on Monday warned Iran of consequences over election interference after Donald Trump's campaign said a foreign adversary hacked documents. The State Department deputy spokesperson Vedant Patel was the briefer.
On Friday, Microsoft revealed that Iranian government-backed cyber hackers had targeted a U.S. presidential campaign back in June. Then on Saturday, the Trump campaign said they had been hacked by Iranian cyber hackers. Following later the same day, Politico said they had been in receipt of hacked emails that had internal Trump campaign documents, and they believed those were coming from an Iranian source. I know you're not going to comment on a campaign issue. I'm not looking for that. What I'm looking for is, can you comment more broadly on the threat of Iranian interference in the election?
So this is something that we've raised for some time, Julian. We've raised concerns that Iranian cyber actors have been seeking to influence elections around the world, including those happening in the United States. These latest attempts to interfere in U.S. elections are nothing new for the Iranian regime, which, from our vantage point, has undermined democracies, or attempted to, for many years now. Specifically, I'd refer you to the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence for further details on recent reports about the natures of this kind of malicious interference, and colleagues at the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security can speak to what steps are being taken to combat domestic election influence by hostile foreign governments more broadly. As you know, as someone who covers this department closely, that is not a line of effort that exists at the State Department.
Can you talk broadly about what kind of leverage the U.S. has to discourage Iran from even planning to
for
interfere?
Any kind of malign, destabilizing activity that the Iranian regime could partake in, and certainly trying to meddle and influence elections, I would certainly count that high among them. We continue to have a number of tools in our tool belt to hold the Iranian regime accountable, and we won't hesitate to use them, certainly, and not just unilaterally, but also multilaterally through entities like the G7 and otherwise. But specifically on actions, on deterrent actions as it relates to this, I will let my colleagues at the FBI and DHS speak to it.
State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel. New York Times article begins, President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia lashed out at the West over Ukraine's week-long incursion into Russian territory in a tense, televised meeting with his top officials on Monday, a sign of how the surprise attack has unsettled the Kremlin. Mr. Putin, speaking with security chiefs and regional governors at his residence outside Moscow, insisted that the attack would not soften his negotiating position. He said the West is fighting us with the hands of the Ukrainians, repeating the frequent depiction of the 30-month war, which he started as a proxy campaign against Russia by the West. The enemy will certainly get the response he deserves, and all our goals, without doubt, will be accomplished. Reporting from the New York Times. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina joined Democratic U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut in Kyiv today, meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. The two then held a news conference on the street. Senator Graham calling the operation in Russia's Kursk region brilliant and bold.
When I think about Kursk, bold, brilliant, beautiful. Keep it up. Putin started this, kick his ass. Bottom line is to the administration, I appreciate your support. Let these people fight. Give them weapons they need to win a war they can't afford to lose. When it comes to F-16s, way too long. They're here. Let's use them. Let's train Ukrainian pilots. When I talked to President Zelensky just a few minutes ago, if you're a retired F-16 pilot and you're looking to fight for freedom, they will hire you here. They're going to look throughout NATO nations for willing fighter pilots who are retired to come help them until they can get their pilots trained. So we're going to get these jets in the air sooner rather than later, and we're looking for pilots who are willing to fight for freedom as the Ukrainians train their own pilots. So my message is we need to be all in. Here's what I want to see happen in 2024, calendar year 2024. I want to see an invitation issued to Ukraine to join NATO. So I'm going to have dinner with the new Secretary General Thursday. I'm going to bring this up. I'm asking President Biden, before you leave office, make sure this invitation gets issued. There'll be another supplemental, I hope, in December. And it will be a military-centric supplemental. The weapons that they're using here are made in America, creating American jobs. And every weapon we give the Ukrainians are used to full effect. We've learned a lot about our own weapon system by providing them to the Ukrainians, what works and what doesn't. So I'm hoping that in December we can have another infusion of weapons provided by the United States to help the Ukrainians fight in 2025.
U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, at a news conference on the street in Kyiv. Standing beside him, Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut. A Reuters article as this: with Russia still struggling to repel the Ukrainian incursion 7 days after it began, Ukraine's top commander said Kyiv controlled around 1,000 square kilometers of the Kursk region. The 2024 Summer Olympics in Paris are over. The International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach said to the athletes at the closing ceremony on Sunday, "Despite all the tensions in our world, you came here from all the 206 national Olympic committees and the IOC Refugee Olympic team to make the City of Light shine brighter than ever before. During all this time, you lived peacefully together under one roof in the Olympic Village. You embraced each other. You respected each other. And even if your countries are divided by war and conflict, you created a culture of peace." On Saturday, Thomas Bach announced that he would not be seeking to change the IOC charter to allow his presidency to be extended. Associated Press writes that Thomas Bach has led the International Olympic Committee since September 2013, and his 12-year presidency was to expire next year, a term limit introduced as part of reforms passed after the Salt Lake City bidding scandal 25 years ago. During that announcement on Saturday in Paris, he also spoke about political pressures the IOC is facing.
Your major concerns are about the political, geopolitical, social, economic uncertainties and about the relevance of the IOC in our divisive world. With regard to our relationship with the world of politics, we are indeed in a situation where political leaders want to pull us on their political side. Political pressure groups push us to make statements serving their particular interest, and many others trying to misuse our worldwide so successful stage for their purposes. All this is proof, and the other side of the coin, all this is proof of our highly increased relevance in politics and society. We have to adapt to this new emerging world order by embracing a trustful dialogue with the established and the rising political powers, in particular with the ever more influential so-called Global South. To achieve this, we have to show that in our Olympic world, there is no Global South or Global North. We have to be a truly global organization. We have to reflect the diversity of this world.
International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach on Saturday in Paris, part of a speech in which he announced he will be leaving his position next year as scheduled. And you can mark your calendars. Opening ceremony for the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, July 14th, 2028, with the Paralympics beginning August 15th, 2028. Story from Forbes magazine. Former YouTube chief and Silicon Valley pioneer Susan Wojcicki, who served as the video sharing platform's longest-serving CEO during some of its most formative years, died Friday at the age of 56, according to a statement from her husband, provoking an outpour of support and condolences from YouTube creators and technology executives. In 2014, Susan Wojcicki spoke at the Johns Hopkins University commencement about Google buying YouTube.
We realized online video was a new medium, that it could unleash the creativity of people all over the world and also spark the curiosity of people who wanted to watch them. And even though we knew this was early, it had the potential to be big. But soon after we had our initial success with Google Video, another site launched, YouTube, and it started growing faster, a lot faster. And all of a sudden, we saw our newfound success slipping away. And just after we thought we were winning, we found out that we were losing. We were scared and confused. Very quickly, I had to make a tough call. Do we pretend that things are okay and try to fix them and continue to build out Google Video and hope we catch up? Or do we admit our failure and look to acquire YouTube, a company with no revenue, lots of legal liability, it was only a year old, and pay $1.6 billion for it? And just as we were making this decision, as if it was not hard enough, an industry veteran, an internet investor, published a well-read article saying, only a moron would buy YouTube. Well, you know how this ended. I guess you can call me a moron. But I had to go to our founders and our board and tell them the product that we'd spent so much time building, Google Video, was losing, and we would have to spend over $1.5 billion to fix the mistake. It was painful, it was public, it was one of the hardest decisions that I've had to make. People on my team quit in revolt. But acting fast, facing up to the problem, making a decision, buying YouTube, and then investing heavily in it was also one of the best decisions that we've ever made.
Susan Wojcicki, former Google executive and then YouTube CEO from 2014 until she stepped down in 2023, speaking in 2014 at Johns Hopkins University commencement. That from C-SPAN's video library at cspan.org. She has died at the age of 56. Apple CEO Tim Cook posting on X, saddened to hear of the passing of Susan Wojcicki. She was one of Silicon Valley's visionaries and will be missed by so many. May she rest in peace. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and you'll have the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.